January 17, 1944, southern Italy. The hills around the Liri Valley were cold and silent, except for the far-off rumble of engines. Frost clung to the stone walls of abandoned farms like a shroud. German infantrymen of the 44th Division waited in half-frozen trenches, shoulders hunched against the biting wind, rifles pointed toward the mist. They had fought here for weeks, stopping one Allied attempt after another with grim efficiency. When they heard heavy vehicles moving through the fog, they braced for tanks, probably Shermans, noisy but predictable. Yet the sound that approached was different. Each turn of the track came with a steady metallic beat, clank, hiss, thump. It was a rhythm of mechanical purpose, lacking the chaotic clatter of a tank. Then came fire. Not a scattered burst, not the usual few shells to test a line, but a continuous roar that lifted the earth itself. Out of the gray came short, squat machines bearing white stars. They were not tanks. They were guns on tracks. They were the M7 priests. And in the months to follow, that sound would become every German infantryman's warning that no trench, no wall, no forest could save him. The M7 priest was born from America's answer to a simple problem. During the early years of the war, artillery was still a cumbersome beast, often being towed into position by trucks or horses. The old methods worked in slow wars of static fronts, but the new war was one of blitzkrieg and rapid movement. Tanks and armored infantry could drive dozens of miles a day, leaving their heavy fire support far behind. The Americans needed artillery that could keep up, fast, reliable, and self-moving. By 1942, factories were converting the chassis of the M3 Lee tank into a new kind of weapon, a 105mm howitzer fixed inside an open-topped armored hull. It was a purely functional design, prioritizing speed and firepower over heavy protection. A tall ring-shaped machine gun mount rose at the front, resembling a pulpit, and soldiers almost immediately began calling the vehicle a priest. Soon thousands were shipped to Africa, Italy, Normandy, and beyond, ready to preach a sermon in high explosive. To the German soldier, it was not the priest's shape or armor that caused fear. It was the rhythm. Priests fired quickly and moved constantly. They became masters of the shoot-and-scoot tactic. Enemy observers who tried to target them found their coordinates useless minutes later. They operated in batteries of 4 to 6, driving into position, unleashing a storm of shells with a deafening overlapping roar, then vanishing behind the hills before counterfire arrived. Even the sound of their work was unsettling. German diaries frequently mentioned the steady voice of American guns that never seemed to sleep, a relentless pounding that ate away at their nerves. A corporal near Anzio later wrote, "Their artillery rolls forward as if on an endless rail. It stops, the ground opens, then it is gone again, its work done. We have nothing to shoot back at." This ghostly quality was a new and terrifying form of warfare. For men who had been raised on the precision creed of the Wehrmacht, tight fire discipline, exact calculation, limited resources, the endless abundance behind those M7s felt unreal. Every barrage seemed wasteful, profligate, yet it kept coming. By mid-1944, American factories were producing an almost unbelievable 750,000, an almost unbelievable 105mm shells per month. When one priest fired 20 rounds too many, replacements waited in the next convoy of GMC trucks. U.S. supply chains stretched across oceans, but worked like clockwork. To the Germans, fighting with dwindling fuel and shrinking ammo stores, it appeared almost supernatural. They named the American guns the Iron Thunderers, a name that acknowledged both their power and their seemingly inexhaustible source. This wasn't just warfare, it was industrial warfare, and they were on the losing side of the equation. The first large-scale appearance of the M7 priest came in North Africa in 1942. There, it proved that mobility was as valuable as armor. The British, who received many priests under Lend-Lease, used them to drive alongside tanks, overwhelming fixed German anti-tank positions. The American commanders refined this tactic in the rugged terrain of Sicily and Italy, turning the vehicle into a rolling orchestra of fire. The priest was not built to duel with tanks. Its open top and thin armor made that a suicidal proposition, but to accompany infantry, break through defenses, and crush resistance miles ahead of any static battery. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, more than 4,500 priests had been built. That number would double before war's end, ensuring that every major American advance would be preceded by its thundering voice. The German army had been trained to expect artillery as a separate branch, slow, heavy, and bound to its firing line miles behind the front. What they faced in Italy and later in France defied that structure. Allied artillery mounted on tracks advanced almost shoulder to shoulder with Sherman tanks. When one German bunker or machine gun nest fired, 3 shells from nearby priests would hit it moments later, directed by a forward observer. When defenders pulled back to a new line, the same mobile batteries shifted forward within minutes to pound the new position. It was relentless, efficient, and terrifying. Reports from the 90th Panzer Grenadier Division described the American method as rolling fire that walks with the enemy. A creeping barrage that didn't just precede an attack, but actively participated in it, smothering any attempt at organized defense. Factual records confirm how thoroughly this changed warfare. In the 6 months after D-Day, Allied forces fired more than 25 million rounds from self-propelled 105mm guns. The rate of fire averaged 10 rounds per minute per gun. Because priests could move immediately after shooting, losses to counter battery fire were minimal. Their presence also transformed morale on their own side. U.S. infantrymen often wrote that they felt a roof of fire above them, a sense that help was constant and overwhelming. It was a shield forged from high explosive. Colonel Louis F. Lehnert of 2nd Corps noted early in the Italian campaign, "Infantry morale triples when priests serve in support. It is belief made mechanical." That mechanical belief gave American GIs the confidence to assault positions that would have otherwise seemed impregnable. The Germans encountered them first with curiosity, then dread. At Monte Cassino, prisoners spoke of artillery disguised as tanks. In Normandy, they called them factory guns. The phrase carried grudging respect. These were not wonders of design like the Tiger, but they came in endless numbers and they worked. American soldiers joked that the priests preached sermons in high explosive. The Germans remembered that fire in much darker tones. Throughout the campaign, one recurring object linked these battles: the small canned ration. Everywhere the Americans fought, they left piles of tin cans. Empty C-ration tins rolled across fields littered with shell casings, each stamped and produced in the same mills. Food and ammunition, sustenance and destruction came from the same source. The Germans noticed. They called the rations conserving iron preserves, and joked bitterly that the Americans fought on meat and steel. Together, the can and the priest told a simple truth: this enemy would never run out. When U.S. armored and infantry units rolled through France after June 1944, priests formed the unseen backbone of every major advance. At Saint-Lô, they fired near-constant barrages that pulverized the dense hedgerows, turning natural fortresses into dust. During the breakout at Falaise, they provided mobile fire that eliminated German rearguard positions faster than tanks could spot them, creating a scythe of steel that cut through the defense. Even at night, the guns worked by muzzle flash and radio coordinate, never allowing the enemy a moment of peace. One French farmer later remembered the ground trembling all night long, as if thunder had learned to walk. The German foot soldier learned to read the signs: first, the distant engines, then the metallic chant of the tracks, then fire. In memoirs, many admitted that this kind of warfare, industrial, endless, precise in its mass, was something Germany could never equal after 1943. By then, the numbers themselves told the story. Ammunition consumption for one U.S. Army field division often exceeded 12,000 shells a day. Inside the priests, life was exhausting. Six-man crews lived among cordite fumes that stung the eyes, deafening shocks and armor so hot from sun and blast that water boiled on it. The open top left them exposed, yet it also kept the bore clear for faster loading. They slept in shifts, leaning on shell crates. Veterans described the gun's recoil as a kick from industry itself. Burned hands and ringing ears were the badges of that profession. Each of its 105mm shells weighed 33 pounds. If a crew fired without pause for an hour, they expended roughly 8 tons of metal and explosive. And the trucks behind them would already be rolling with another load. That reality struck the German high command harder than the guns themselves. Late war reports noted, almost in resignation, that enemy fire suggests no limit of supply. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets fielded massive guns, but it was the Western Allies who perfected the coordination of mobility and firepower. The Priest was the first truly practical, medium self